Hi, I'm Carolina.
Hi, I'm Annalisa.
And we'd like to welcome you to the 4th episode of The Real Place.
Yes, The Real Place. It's a brand new podcast, first of its kind, a global exclusive, and it's filmed entirely inside the Gemba virtual reality virtual workplace.
For every episode, we send an Oculus Quest wireless VR headset to our guest, whatever they are in the world. And then me and Annalisa put on our quest to jump into the virtual world to meet and interview them. We invite true experts, visionaries, people who have been there, done that, and have the scars to prove it. And the premise of the podcast is that each one of them gives us just one prediction for the future.
It could be a prediction on how we're going to work, how a specific industry is going to change, or it could be very focused on one company, a challenge, or even one individual. Either way, the aim is to go beyond buzzwords and to really get to grips with the changes in business that are coming our way.
Yes, what we really want to know is how those at the forefront of the world's top brands think and act, really peeling back the layers to understand how we could be doing things better to progress and create positive change.
Thanks, Carolina. That brings us on to our guest, Trevor Philips, the journalist for The Times, broadcaster and a former politician, is with us today to challenge our perceptions in every way on what is truth, what is equality, what is courage. This one is guaranteed to make you stop and think.
And just before we jump in, make sure to stick around until the end of the episode as we ask our guests to nominate a colleague, partner, or a rival to join us in The Real Place next time. So stay tuned for that and enjoy the episode.
Hi, Trevor. It's your first time in The Real Place. And for all first-time viewers, each episode, we ask our guest one prediction for the future. Could be a prediction about how we're going to work, how a specific industry is going to change, or it could be very focused on one company challenge, or even one individual. What's your prediction, Trevor?
My prediction for the future is everything faster. Whatever you can think of, it will be faster. If you want to locate it on any particular company, we're all Googling every day. It'll get faster. That's my big prediction.
Okay, thank you. Can you give maybe an example of why you believe that for our viewers?
I'll give you an example. When I started in journalism, 40 years ago, if you wanted to discover something about somebody, in my case, you were the person who just got told, go and find out about this person's history and all the jobs they've done, who they've got married to, who their girlfriend in the sixth form was. What is it that we ought to write a story about them about? And that might take you a week because you'd have to ring up all their friends and you have to ring up all their enemies and you would have to go through everything they'd written and anything you'd seen on the TV or radio about them. Today, you give me a name, and I can tell you a story about that person in 3 minutes? In fact, I'm still thinking, can I Google Annalisa Gemba or Carolina? And what will that tell me?
Better not.
Excuse me while I just leave for 2 minutes and come back.
No, very fair point and very powerful, I'm sure. So, Trevor, as a journalist for The Guardian and The Times, for our viewers, I think it's important to say you're not afraid to express strong and sometimes controversial opinions. Why do you think freedom of expression is so important?
Well, I think the important way to say this is this. For anybody who would be watching or listening to this, they will know that at every point, every stage, every place in history, there is somebody that can take pretty much everything away from you. They can take your house away, they can take your job away, even in some cases take your family away. The last thing anybody can take from you are your thoughts and your words. And that is, for most of us, the one final defense. Once you're deprived of the ability to, if we want to make it really elemental, the moment you're deprived of the ability to say no, I think that makes you less than human, actually. That is the last thing that we can all do. We can say to somebody else or something else, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to be that. I want to be the person I am. And that is why I think, in the end, the freedom of expression is essential to the thing that makes us human. Even in this kind of environment, the difference between the three of us and a robot who might wander in here is that any one of us can say, no, don't want to answer that question. Don't want to ask that question. Don't want to have that conversation. The machine can't.
That's quite a powerful thing to say, Trevor, I think. But what's kind of coming to me is freedom of expression is important. And you're right, that ability to be able to say no, the fear of the repercussions of saying no, or the fear of how your words might be interpreted, or how it might hurt or affect someone else. I think that is sometimes what stops people from expressing themselves. You're always considering, the other entity, the other person.
Yeah, that's slightly, I think that's slightly a different story. I mean, all of us want to be polite. I mean, you're never going to say to your sister, the truth is, you have always been ugly, right? You're never going to, well, I hope neither of you is ever going to say that. That's something you're going to keep to yourself for the whole of your lifetime. So nobody wants to be unkind to others unnecessarily. But I think in the end, we have to be true to ourselves, don't we? I mean, how can you ever trust somebody if you don't know that when that person says, I agree with you, that's what they really mean, and I will stand by you?
I think it's an interesting concept.
All time.
I would say that's interesting to apply to business. Obviously, the world that we meet so many people in, and sort of the pressures within that environment that are being applied upon an individual who perhaps might be thinking these thoughts, but perhaps never expressing them, and what that really does to a person. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, as our audience, I'm sure, would love to hear.
I'm chairman of a couple of businesses, and part of the role that I play, I mean, all businesses are essentially led by their founders or their chief executives and so on. But they have people like me around, partly to stop them in a way, maybe going too far in this direction or that direction, and also to be a sounding board. But one of the things that a non-executive on a business brings is the capacity to say, who should you trust? Great leaders and chief executives always have to have people around them who encourage them and support them and so on. But in the days when I did that job myself, one of the things I learned quite early on is that it is also important to have somebody next to you who says, you know what, Trevor, that thing that you want to do, that company you want to buy, or that campaign you want to launch, or that document you want to write and publish, it's pretty good. It's terrific. It would really make a difference, and it would make a splash, and people would pay attention, and it will be regarded as a good thing, except that it would be regarded as a good thing if somebody else did it. But if you did it, it won't work. And that's often for a business leader for all sorts of reasons. You spend a long time making big decisions, and no big decision happens without some people feeling bruised or lost out, or that they've lost out. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a decision. If it was something everybody loved, there's no decision to be made. Sometimes for a business leader, what he or she needs is somebody who's going to say, this can be done, but it can't be done by you. And that's why this idea that actually having people around you who are ready to help you understand who you should really trust and what you can do and what you can't do, I think is so important.
Totally agree. Absolutely. And I suppose moving on to a slightly more serious topic, we've seen recently you wrote an essay for the Times on wokeism and what being woke really means for race, equality and feminism today. I mean, what does it mean to be woke, and why is this topic relevant today?
Yeah. Look, when I was a kid, really, and a young man, people were able, and they felt comfortable saying all kinds of things about other people and their characteristics, things that they couldn't change. So, to take it away, for example, from gender and race, when I was a child, you wouldn't think twice about teasing a boy who had suffered from polio and had what were then called calipers, support on his legs. I mean, people would think that was funny because he walked oddly or awkwardly. And I don't care what people of my age now say, because everybody's very righteous now. But the truth of the matter is, actually, almost nobody, maybe a boy's mum, would think that was rude or upsetting. They'd say, oh, come on, get over it, you've got to live with it, sort of thing. Now, over the last 30 or 40 years, I think people have learnt these things are hurtful, they're unnecessary, and actually we can live in a world where people don't get treated like that. And we've also realized if you treat people like that, they can't make a contribution to society, they can't be part of the gang, we'll never see the best of those individuals. So I think we've changed in that respect. And I think that is fantastic. But you see, that is all, in my view, and the work that we've done on gender, equality, the issues of diversity and so on, all of that, in my book, was fantastic because what it was about was lifting people up, giving people the opportunity to be who they really wanted to be and contribute in the way they really want to be. The problem with what we now call woke is that it's become about something quite different. It's become about saying, well, if somebody is disadvantaged relative to some other person, white man or whoever it is, what we don't do is focus on lifting up everybody else. What we focus on is bringing those people down and making sure that this so-called privilege that they have is somehow dispelled. Now, there are two problems with that. First of all, a lot of people who are supposed to be privileged wouldn't recognize that word at all. There's a lot of talk these days about white privilege. Well, go to one of England's coastal towns or one of the mining communities where everything has essentially been destroyed, or the steel towns in the Midwest of the United States, and tell the people there, who are mostly pretty much exclusively white, that they've had a privilege. They've had the privilege of having their lives and their histories completely destroyed, and then comes COVID. Tell those people that being white somehow sheltered them from the factories being closed, or the foundries being stilled, or their families falling into poverty and taking drugs and so on. Those guys don't think that they're privileged, and frankly, they're correct. And the other point I think about this is that the whole idea of white privilege somehow, in my mind, has become a sort of excuse for not understanding or accepting there are differences. And most importantly, I don't know what I look like in this environment, but as a person of color, what I really, really hate is the idea that I'm like I am limited entirely by what some other people do to me. It is true, if you're a person of color, you will experience discrimination, you'll experience all sorts of negative things, but I won't be ruled by that. I'm not going to sit around and say, oh, there's nothing I can do, because actually, because of the way I look, I'm kind of stuck, and I've got to wait for these people to change their attitudes and decide they're going to be lovely to me. No. It ain't going to happen like that. I think all of these notions, under the guise of trying to be compassionate, what they're really about is taking away the agency of men or of women, people from minorities, and making them just kind of passive pawns in somebody else's game. I'm never going to play that game.
That's quite powerful, what you've said. Annalise, I don't know if you want to ask a question. I can go second, but I saw something on Twitter, and I think this ties in quite nicely, Trevor, with what you've just said, because you said that the differences of perspective won't be solved by silencing those with whom we disagree. So,
yes.
How do you use freedom of expression to solve differences in both our professional and personal lives? How do you think that works?
Well, sometimes it is much harder in the personal life because for people that you're close to, you're always to some extent not hampered, but the first thing you want is to make sure that person doesn't ever feel hurt. And sometimes the truth does hurt. Yeah. So in personal life, I think it's more difficult. In my public life, I think that my overall absolute fixation is a kind of honesty. And what I mean by honesty is not just the facts, but I mean the whole facts. People talk a lot these days about alternative facts and fake news and so on. Well, I think the truth is that it's not that there are 100 facts and then there's 100 untruths. What usually happens is that there may be 100 facts about any given situation. Let's say we're trying to explain why there is a gender pay gap or an ethnic pay gap. There are probably 50 or 60 reasons in any given company. I think the truth means that you have to talk about all of those 60 facts. What I object to is when people say, well, actually, there's only 5 things that matter here. And the 5 things are what the CEO says or what somebody did in 1983. And we forget about the other 55, which might include the fact that some people don't want to work in a particular way, and that there's a choice for the company. Do they accommodate that, or do they simply say, that's not going to work because it's going to kill our business? Now, my point, which I'm not making my point is a very simple one. I think we have to be honest with each other. We should be as generous. We should be as kind. We should not, generally speaking, try and belittle others, which is where I think, for example, a lot of social media is about. Mm-hmm. They don't, people don't play, as we say when we're playing football, people don't play the ball, they play the man. They go after the person without dealing with their actual argument. I think it's very important to focus on what is it we're really trying to do, rather than are you on some other team because you're on the other team, whatever you say must be bad. My grandmother used to say a thing that's always stuck with me: do not dismiss something out of hand because you don't like the person who's saying it. She would say, just because the devil's whistling a tune doesn't make it a bad tune. And so
that's a great
I think
thing.
I just think we need to be more generous. We need to be more open, but we need to be ready to accept that there are things that people will say that will make us feel uncomfortable, that we won't like. Another way of looking at it, because this is about the interaction between the personal and the issues. Abraham Lincoln once said about somebody, I do not like that man at all. I must get to know him better. That's the way I think about it.
I mean, that's actually really interesting to put in contrast with your prediction with things, now happening faster and faster. And perhaps this is like a coping mechanism for us, that we sort of judge things by perceptions to make it easier. And I suppose the question is, how do we fix that as it's not going to slow down for us anytime soon in work life or personal life?
That's a really good point, by the way, because I think I'm not against social media. I think people get on their high horse a bit about, how evil social media is and so on. The thing that is important is that a lot of the capabilities of social media have got ahead of what we as humans can do, and they don't give us time for an essential human quality, which is reflection. Somebody goes ding 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 ding, 280 characters. I read this. It's this. When I started work, if somebody wanted to send you a memo, it was like, it'd take them ages to get it, to compose it, and then they'd have to put it on paper, and then the paper would somehow have to get to you by the end time of that. You're an old man by the time you got the memo. But the point is, everybody had a bit more time because of the process just to reflect, A, on what they're saying, and B, on what they are hearing or reading. Now, I think we've lost that. And somehow that's happened without us noticing it. So I suppose if I had a big recommendation, I'd love Twitter or Instagram or any of these outfits to find a way of inserting a thinking delay before you reply. Because a lot of the rows and a lot of the things that happen are because somebody hasn't quite thought it through. And we all know, you get in, or you're in a discussion with your friends, or and you say something, and then you say, "Oh, crikey, I wish I just kept my mouth shut for 5 seconds. Otherwise, I would never have said that."
Is there anything you do personally as like a stop and think, or is that something is just, I guess, within you?
Oh no, I'm hopeless. I don't follow my own rules at all. I think I probably have, as I've got older, this was not always true of me. One of the little rule I have for myself is, if you have nothing to say, don't say it. I think everybody who is in any business will know the character who on any agenda item has to have something to say, and generally speaking will say it at great length, and you think, for heaven's sake, we've been here an hour, we could have done this in 20 minutes. But I think that causes an awful lot of trouble. If, this is also self-interest. Generally speaking, I think if you're going to say something, you want people to hear it and you want people to remember it. And if you say too many things, nobody remembers it. And it's interesting. You said, Caroline, a little while ago in this conversation about, I don't write for The Guardian anymore. I write for The Times, and you're right that some of the things that I have written are regarded as controversial. I, by the way, never get this. I never understand why that is. But anyway, I've got used to it. But my view is I do not write every week. I write normally every fortnight, and that's for a reason. It is because I don't think I have something worth something to say that is worth a Times reader spending 10 minutes on every single week. I think I can do it 25 times a year, but I do not want to be a person who just fills the space.
That's quite important and considerate of you, given our audience, especially having this experience of flood of information and news and advice. And I think this is something I think everyone could take as a piece of advice from you.
Yeah, say it less often and think before you say it. I think those are my rules.
Powerful indeed. I think that's for us to transition to another space. We've had some really good reflections in that room. Annalise, if you're happy to. So our last guest, as you know him very well, Greg Dyke, he nominated you to be on this podcast, and he said that your perspective on leadership would be very interesting given your background. How do you know Greg, and I guess why do you think he said that?
Oh, because he always wants to ruin my life, that's why. I met him when I went to work for London Weekend Television, and this is before the dawn of time, back in 1980. And he was a producer. I joined as, the lowest of the low, a junior researcher. And we worked in the same department. I worked, from time to time, we would work on the same program. And we just got on because, most people who are not completely up themselves would get on with Greg. He is, straightforward guy. There's nothing massively complicated about him. He's likable, and he is an absolute brilliant leader. I mean, I know this is a very old-fashioned expression, and I would only use it because it's got history. Greg is a leader of men. That is to say, when he is in charge of an organization, I'm not going to say he's perfect and every decision he's ever made is right. I mean, he's made some spectacularly bad ones. But one of the things that you will always know is that people in that organization absolutely admire him and respect him and will follow him into the jaws of hell. So anyway, the point is I got to know him as he rose up the company, and I, to be honest, rose up in his slipstream for what now, probably 10 years actually. So we've been friends 40 years before he went off to do something else, and I went off to do other things. But we stayed friends. We ski together. We see each other socially a lot, and I very frequently seek his advice on things, because he's very smart.
Would you share the best piece of advice that you've received from him?
The best piece of advice? That's a really good question. It's over a long period, actually. I don't know about the best piece of advice, but the most memorable thing that I've ever heard him say, because this is really, it illustrates what kind of person he is. We both worked in the journalistic department of London Weekend. London Weekend was a very wealthy television company. We had the weekend franchise for London. Basically, we could demand whatever we wanted from advertisers, so the company was very well off. And therefore, it was a good company to work for, hard to get into, and so on. But one of the downsides of that is that, if I'm completely honest, we tended to think that we could do anything, and therefore we could make programs that we were interested in, but frankly, the audience didn't think much of. But that didn't matter, because we were making so much money out in other parts of the schedule. We could just put any old nonsense on television. And I say any old nonsense. We put on some very highbrow shows that were I would be very proud of, but to be honest, nobody watched because they're too difficult and demanding. And I remember Greg at an all-company meeting, and by that, when we say an all-company meeting, in those days we were talking a couple of thousand people in the company, standing up and saying about one of our premier current affairs programs, this is a brilliant program, it's prize-winning, fantastic, but nobody watches it. It would be better for us simply to record the thing on tape and send it to everybody who watches it by motorcycle courier, but play an old film, which would attract more advertising revenue. And I thought to myself, A, he's correct. B, it takes some real, forgive me, stones to get up and say that in front of the board, in front of the 2,000 people who are proud of this thing, and tell them the truth. And in a way, I suppose, Greg is not a guy who kind of sits you down like some wise old sage and gives you little aphorisms and little phrases, but he shows by example what to do. And on that moment, I always remember it because it was in a big meeting in one of the big studios. And I thought, wow. That's always stayed with me, that's the way to do it. If you really believe something and you think it's important to share with everybody you work with or your family or so on, you have to have a really good reason not to say it out loud. Because actually, if you stay silent, what you're really doing is saying, because I don't want to endure the discomfort of people going, why is he saying that? I don't mind if we make the wrong decision and everybody suffers materially or morally in some way. But as long as I don't feel uncomfortable, I don't mind if the whole enterprise suffers. I hadn't quite thought about it that way before this conversation, but I think Greg taught me that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing, Trevor. I really love how you really painted a picture there of someone kind of almost admiring and almost in awe of someone kind of doing something quite bold. And more than that, it actually impacted your life. It changed your life, I guess, in your perspective and in terms of how to kind of approach things. And I think this podcast really is about connecting people and understanding what makes people like yourself, visionaries like yourself, successful. You sharing that story, you're kind of giving a little bit, insight to them on how your relationship with, another inspirational person like Greg has, helped you on your journey of being successful. So looking back, I guess, what were some of your life-defining moments?
Can I just say, that's a very nice thing to say about me, but I should also maybe just say, and in the spirit of honesty, it also helps that Greg's honesty and attitude has also helped it to make him preposterous amounts of money. And that is always, from somebody who comes from a relatively modest background. So I don't want to make it sound like I've discovered, some sort of saint who has sat on top of the mountain dispensing wisdom. One of the convincing things about Greg is that he's able to do this, but also do it in a real world in which he wins. I mean, he loses sometimes, but he also is a winner. And all of that is, all those things are part of what makes him what he is.
And I guess in terms, if we come back a bit, so what are some of kind of those life-defining moments, if you may? I know it's kind of...
For me?
Yes, and I know you are quite humble person, but it'd be nice to kind of shout about some of those moments where you felt, you were shining, or that, really was a life-defining moment for you.
That's interesting. I can talk about all sorts of things that change your life. I'll start with one, and as I'm talking about it, maybe I'll think about another that's turned up later. Probably the single most important thing, like for most people who come from my background, is something that happens within your family. I come from a very big family. My father had 10 children, and I think you will understand, Annalisa, not all with the same partner.
Yes, not very Caribbean.
Exactly. Exactly. We're talking the same language here. But, my father's the kind of man he was. He died when I was a teenager, because I was the last of the 10. So they had me when they were quite old, or middle-aged. But he, though he died when I was young, was and actually is still a dominant figure in my life because, my father's very charismatic, kind of a person of worth and attention, which is probably why he was able to have such an entertaining range of relationships. But anyway, he was a postman for quite a long time. We come from pretty ordinary backgrounds back home in what was then British Guiana. He worked in the railways, he worked on the docks, came to England, he was in the building trade, then worked on the railways again, then he worked for the post office. And I remember him taking me to what he would call the office when I must have been 7 or 8. And in those days, the sorting of mail wasn't done by machines, it was done by men. Mm-hmm. I mean, all men. The bags of letters and so on would come in and they would be sorted on a big floor. I mean, 50 meters by 25 meters with bags. The sorter would get 100 letters and he would toss them into Aberdeen or New Zealand or wherever it happened to go into the sack that represented that place. Most of the men at that time, it was very much a job that West Indians, as we would call them then, people from the Caribbean, mm-hmm. immigrants from the Caribbean, would be doing. And my father was one of them. He became a senior man, partly because he was a bit older. And I remember standing on the edge of the sorting floor with these, what seemed like hundreds, but probably dozens of men doing the sorting. People would go by and they'd say, "Good morning, Mr. George," which is a very Caribbean way of paying respect.
Yeah.
And so on. And, I felt, my dad's a big guy here. And then another man who was not one of these people, not wearing a uniform, walked across, and he was English, and my father said, "There goes one of the governors." A moment that's stayed with me my whole life. It's now more 55, 60 years, because it wasn't just a simple statement. It was, there's somebody who's doing something that you or I would never do, because he is who he is and we are who we are. I didn't really think about this until quite a lot later in my life, probably in my middle age, but I realized that moment, and why it's stuck in my memory, is that at that moment, I think I decided I'm not going to be somebody who is destined to wear a uniform because that's what the world thinks I'm supposed to do. I want to be able to choose what I want to do and who I want to be. And I think that's a moment that's absolutely stayed with me my whole life. And to some extent, I suspect it's probably shaped a lot of my character, because I guess, for better or for worse, the thing that you would always say about me is that I'm a person who walks to the beat of his own drum.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's always a great thing. It's not always a wonderful thing. Sometimes you need to be a team player. Well, I would say I'm okay at it, but actually others might not. But I know that what lies behind that is that really strong feeling that I do not want anybody else to determine my fate. I will make my own mistakes. I will hold myself accountable. I'll take responsibility for the things that I do. The other thing which I suppose I would do, because you were talking really about leadership, and this is something I think about, I've thought about a lot at the other end of my life. It's very interesting, coming back to Greg, very interesting thing about Greg. He is, not being disrespectful to anybody, I come from a religious background, so I would always, I suppose, think about things in these terms. Greg is a sort of messiah leader. He's the kind of guy that people turn to, they admire, he brings people together in all sorts of ways around his persona. And that's a very special talent, very special kind of leader. It's worth remembering that messiahs need other people around them who do a different sort of business. And I would call them the John the Baptist characters. And these are often the people who nobody really wants to have to tea, because they are rough and they're loud, and they are kind of, they're sometimes disagreeable, but you know where they stand, man. They're not consensualists. They don't bring people together. But what they do is shake people out of their complacency. They make it evident that we've got to do something. Messiah can then come in and lead us to the better promised land. But somebody has to say, first of all, where we are now, man, got to get out of this. It's not good enough. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I think that I've discovered somewhere in the last 10 to 15 years that though I would love to be the Messiah, I'm really John the Baptist. And the reason this is, I laugh about it, is that unfortunately, though both of them ended up in not such a great place, John the Baptist had his head cut off and presented to the Queen on a silver platter. The thing is that everybody remembers the Messiah and his passing in a good way, nobody remembers what happened to John the Baptist because he was just a pain in the butt. But, I suppose he had some fun along the way. And I'm probably more that kind of leader than the other ones.
Are you concerned about, I guess, leaving a legacy, Trevor? Is that something that's important to you, being remembered in a certain way or breaking certain barriers?
No. I don't think that's what I do. I want to be remembered by my family, by my wife, my children, and that's a very important aspect of my life. I'm, again, this is maybe a very Caribbean thing. One of the real features, I suppose, of Caribbean life is that many of us have no history. We have to find it or reconstruct it because, in this, for example, in England, lots of people can say, oh, my great-grandfather lived in this village and, his grandfather lived in the village down the valley, and you can trace it. You can look at the tombstones and the register of births and marriages and so on. You can work it out, and you can say, there are people in this country who can trace their family's histories back 1,000 years, and I envy that. I can't. So the whole concept of family and belonging and understanding the family story is very important to me. And in that sense, I would like my family to remember me as part of a continuing story. Not that concerned about anybody else. In my public life, what is perhaps more important to me, to answer your question directly, the people that I have given an opportunity to are successful. I hope that they'll remember I gave them an opportunity. But the thing that really makes me proud, and I have no shame about the fact that I boast about this quite often, is I want to be able to say, yeah, that guy won an Oscar 2 years running. I gave him his first job as a researcher. That's true, by the way, about somebody. That person has just built a business in recruitment, and okay, he left our business, but we taught him how to do that. That's important to me. I'm not that bothered about people remembering Trevor Philips did that or wrote that. Partly because, actually, nobody ever remembers what you did for your sake. They remember it so that they can deploy it in some argument that they're having. And they're usually, even while I'm still alive, I hear people saying, well, Trevor said this, and I want to say, no, I didn't say that at all. You're just saying that so you can win this argument. You're just using my name. I'm not one who's sort of given to that sort of legacy. My legacy, I hope, will be in the people rather than in remembering my name.
Well, that's quite amazing and generous of you, I suppose. So obviously, thank you for sharing in general
My
what
pleasure.
you just did. It's quite brave, and thank you for doing that. I suppose, before the podcast, we have asked you if you had any special requests for your time in VR, and we're really happy to hear that you said music. I mean, something that's really close to my and Annalisa's heart. So we've listened, and we brought your little personal playlist with us.
Oh, cool.
I'll just give you a little peek here. Presentations. There we go. Your little personal playlist.
Oh,
so
sensational.
if you actually turn around, we can have a quick listen. If you'd like, you just follow me. Beautiful. I mean,
Thank you so much.
No problem.
It's extraordinary what he can.
I'd like to just introduce you to this part of our episode, which every episode, as you may have seen, we ask our guests to nominate the next person to be on the podcast, just as Greg nominated you. So if you'd like to pick up a pen and let us know who that would be great.
Yep. I'm going to do this with the red pen.
Good choice.
This is one of my great friends, and she is a really lovely lady, and you will really enjoy meeting her.
Incredible. Amazing. Well, we look forward to having June with us. If you can just introduce her for us in a one sentence, that would be great.
June Sarpong is a young woman who came to public attention because she was a television presenter for Channel 4, presented their young youth programs, I think it's called T4, for many years. And then she gave that up and went off to become a writer and a business executive, and is now a senior member of the BBC's executive board, and has written a couple of very successful books, mainly focusing, by the way, on diversity. But she is a charming, clever, and accomplished woman.
Amazing. Well, we're very excited, and thank you so much for nominating her.